Track one on IoT security, and we have a nice short keynote address by Dr. Phil Polstra, author Linux Forensics. He's author of Windows Forensics, Linux Forensics, hacking and penetration testing with low-power devices, and hundreds of instructional videos. He's a hardware hacker and a security professional, international speaker, as well as a college professor. So over to Dr. Phil. Please come on stage. Thanks for coming, Doc.
All right, well, I don't know if this is on yet. Oh, now it is. Well, thanks for having me. I just wanted to say a couple of quick things. I was asked if I could come and talk a little bit about forensics, because that's sort of my day job. As was mentioned, I teach at a university. I actually teach in a digital forensics program. It's one of only 6 that is endorsed by the NSA in digital forensics. But I just want to talk real quickly about some forensic challenges I see when we look at IoT. So my first challenge that I think is out there when we look at forensics as it applies to IoT stuff is that there's really no definition of normal. Right? You say, what is normal behavior for an IoT device? And really, there's no standards out there. There's no industry standard that says this is how an IoT device should act. And because of that, it's really hard to say, I was just talking a couple of minutes ago, literally, about behavioral analysis, and it's kind of a hard thing to do with IoT devices. And it kind of brings up something that happened recently where a lot of people thought they were getting DDoSed. They're like, oh no, we were getting subjected to this distributed denial of service attack. And it turns out that they weren't getting DDoSed at all. What was happening is that there's this company that makes these little things that go on your wrist. It's called Fitbit. You might have heard of them. And they were sending messages across the internet. Now, if you look at the technical aspects of what happens whenever you send stuff via a web page, you get a user browser string that's part of that. And so if you get something that's not mainstream, it doesn't say I'm Firefox, I'm Internet Explorer, etc., then people are like, oh, someone is scripting something probably in Python and I should be worried. And that's what exactly what happened. A lot of these detection systems came online and said, hey, this is an attack, when it really wasn't. And some other challenges we find when we're looking at forensics of IoT stuff is that many of these devices don't really store any kind of data. Some of these smaller devices have about 0 storage. Recently, I was talking to some others. I run a conference over in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, and we are doing something new this year. We have the first ever Drone Wars Challenge, and this is something that we're doing with the US Army. And we're having a little competition, and we're not doing forensics on the drones, but we are having people doing some attacks on drones as part of this competition, but it has led to many discussions on what do you do to do forensics on some of these drones? And it turns out that some of these drones, depending on how much money you spent on them, have absolutely no storage at all. Others do store information various places, but there's no standard. It's all in a proprietary format. So that's a big challenge for us if we're trying to do forensics on IoT devices. Some other challenges, it's all in the cloud, right? So what do you do? How do you access information that's in the cloud? What are the technical issues of doing that? What are the legal issues depending on where things are stored? There's been some mention earlier today about some of those legal issues, jurisdictional issues. And another challenge that I see is a lack of familiarity. You know, if you look at the hardware that's used for many of these IoT devices, you know, often you're talking about microcontrollers and things like that. And if you look at the average person who went to college and got a degree, there's really not a lot of emphasis on those kinds of things. In fact, it's not just that. Um, it's not just the hardware, but there's an emphasis on the higher level languages. You know, we're not even talking about things like C++. You know, we're talking about things that are even more abstract and further away from the hardware. So, you know, we're educating or failing to educate a lot of the future generation of computer scientists on some of that low-level hardware knowledge and systems knowledge that they need in order to be effective doing forensics. And then finally, the last challenge, as I see it, when it comes to this, is nobody asks the questions. You know, there's some questions that should be asked when it applies to IoT. You know, things like what data has been being transmitted? How is it being transmitted? How is it being secured? Who can access that data? Also, things like, is this information trustworthy? You know, it's been mentioned a couple of times today, you can't use things like IP addresses and MAC addresses in order to say, this is what, you know, an identity is. This is an actual device, and I know it's that device. So you really have no idea if you're talking to the person or thing that you think you're talking to. So anyway, those were just a couple of thoughts that I had on some of the challenges I think that face us when we're looking at forensics as it applies to IoT and the new world moving forward. So thanks for listening, and I think we have a panel that's coming up, and we'll probably talk about this and some more things in a bit.
Hey, thanks, Phil. So